Most of us understand that when the seasons turn warmer from the months of winter, it turns into a time of summer, we are very careful not to be burned by the first few days of being in direct sunlight. During my time in Hawaii, I've seen more than a few people, tourists, that check into their hotel rooms, drop their bags, and immediately go out to the beaches or to the poolside. At least a couple hours, laying out there in the sun. They'd come back to the hotels all red, lobster-like. A few hours later, the pain would begin. And it's a real shame. You get your 1 week of vacation or so, and you spend a good part of the day flying into Hawaii, and you're going to spend another good part of the day flying back home. But you're going to have to spend the next couple days huddled up in your hotel room, pretty much in agony, because you burnt yourself. You didn't stop to think. You know, they say that you should, your first couple times in the sunshine, spend 10, maybe 15, 20 minutes, no more. You're done for the day in the sunshine, even with your sunscreens, because especially if you're a pink skin like me, you burn. Now, this morning we read Moses was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights without eating bread or drinking water, and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the Ten Commandments. Similar to the tourists turning red from being overexposed to the sun, Moses had spent an extended period of time in the direct presence of the Lord. And even though he didn't have sunblock, he was not burned, but he was glowing. He was radiant, it said. He was disfigured. So much that he frightened the people because he glowed, not burned, but still shining. Even in the daylight, if you can imagine. He covered his face to kind of stop the people from freaking out around him. Except when he spoke with the Lord, and then he exposed himself as he was. Now, Moses' change in appearance is the result of a human person being in close proximity with the divine God. Young mothers are said to have the glow of maternity. And there's stories of some Christians, when they convert, express a sensation as if they were glowing with utter joy and happiness at being closer to God. Or at least they experience life differently than they did before. Now, these people could be said to be actually physically, mentally, emotionally changed. Moses was the same. He changed in all these same ways, but Moses experienced even something more special. It could be called the Shekinah glory. The word Shekinah does not appear in the Bible, but the concept does. Shekinah is a term which was coined by the earliest Jewish rabbis, and it comes from a Hebrew term meaning caused him to dwell, to mean God living with the people, visiting, being with the people of earth. You can think of how this occurred when you think of the people fleeing Egypt from their time of slavery. Shekinah was in the Lord appearing in the daytime in a pillar cloud, leading, going in front of them. They followed that cloud in the daytime, and at night, they traveled at night sometimes as well, and it was a pillar of fire so that they could see, and it led them across the desert. This was God being with his people. This was God leading his people in a form, not corporeal, not human flesh and bone, blood, skin, but through a cloud and through a pillar of flame. And the Hebrew nation were not the only people to see this. The Egyptians that were pursuing saw this as well. And when they tried to attack the people, the cloud surrounded the Egyptians, confused them, caused them great distress, defeated their purpose of attacking the Hebrew nation, and they withdrew, realizing that there is a force protecting the Hebrew nation. In Exodus 33, God speaks to Moses out of this pillar cloud. In fact, Moses has several up-close and personal encounters with God. But this morning we specifically focus in on the 40 days he spent on the mountain. And then he came down from the mountain, his face glowing, and he held the new covenant that God had initiated with human, the Ten Commandments. I can imagine, even though after time his face may have faded, stopped glowing as much over time, that the people surely treated him a little differently. He had been with God, and he had the effects to show he had. We can also see God's glory present in the New Testament. The Shekinah glory of God was in Jesus as well. The story this morning of Jesus' transfiguration is told in the Gospel of Luke and also in Mark. But before we actually get to it, we should back up a bit, because our text this morning opened up about 8 days after Jesus said this, and in Mark it says, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him. 6 or 8 days. What was it that Jesus had said those 6 or 8 days ago? What could Jesus have said to cause him to take these particular people up on the mountain with him? Well, what it was Jesus asked the question, but who do you say I am? And Peter confesses the Christ of God. We should look at the transfiguration of Jesus Christ with Peter's words in our minds. Jesus is the Christ of God. Jesus has pronounced that. Jesus is seen, and people and angels and demons confess that Jesus is Son of God, from God, the Christ of God. You see it in Luke 2, demons in Luke 4, and Jesus even himself in Luke 4. But even with these confessions, the disciples still have much to learn about what kind of Messiah Jesus is going to be. They have much more to learn. And here this morning we see Jesus, as we see Jesus quite often, in prayer, in communication, in direct contact with God, as close as he could be, in human form. He was in prayer. Having that private conversation, we read, as he was praying, during his prayers, his face took on the appearance. He changed. His clothes changed. They became bright as a white flash of lightning. When Moses was in close contact with God, his description is pretty similar, yes? He changed physically, altered the appearance to become luminescent. It's not mentioned here, but I kind of wonder, did others come to be with Moses at his time on the mountain with God as others came to be with Jesus when he was with God? But back to the story. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendors, speaking with Jesus. This most significant event is loaded with as many questions as answers. Why Moses? Why Elijah specifically? These two people in their lifetimes represent the direction of Christ. Moses was a prophet to whom God gave the law, and Elijah was a prophet who related the law of Moses in effort to turn the people back to God, to remind them of the covenant that they had with God. In Jewish terminology, Elijah is an eschatological figure. Eschatological meaning the end times. Elijah points to the end times, the future. Moses reminds us of the past and the Exodus, when God freed the people from their long years in slavery. Moses and Elijah also share one more distinctive thing. Each had a very strange departure from this world. Elijah, you remember, was taken up in the whirlwind. Elijah never actually died on earth. And Moses was buried by God. And even the archangel Michael did not know where he was. This is one of those things that you kind of have to tuck away. And I plan to ask about it when I have the opportunity. Because I find it fascinating, but we're not going to get any kind of answers this morning. So just hold that away and you can ask, Moses, you got a minute? So, but in his life on earth, Jesus' mission was to satisfy the covenant of Moses and lead us to the eschatological end time by his new covenant. Jesus, in his one self, ties together the past and the future. Perhaps Moses and Elijah were there to strengthen him and fortify him for his work ahead. And I think they would have been very effective because obviously Jesus was very successful in the work that he performed after. Also, Jesus here in this picture is in close association with historical, religious, highly praised heroes of the Old Testament. When Peter says that we should erect 3 tents, 3 shelters, 3 temples, if you will, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus, Perhaps he said this to try and keep Moses and Elijah there, but for whatever reason, him placing Moses and Elijah on the same level as Jesus was wrong. Jesus is all that Elijah and Moses were and more. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is Christ. I can relate with Peter. I always kind of have, because we share the tendency, he and I, of opening our mouths before we really think about what we're saying. So I give him a little room for being wrong. But I think later he realizes that he was wrong, and maybe that's why they didn't say anything to the others, because it would come out that, and then Peter says, maybe Peter didn't want to hear that. But he is the Son of God, Christ, Jesus. He is the Son of God. He is our salvation. He is our only salvation. Jesus takes us from the past, satisfies the covenant God made with humans through the laws of Moses, each and every one perfectly satisfies those contract points. And by so doing, he is able to reinitiate the covenant we live under today, the covenant of grace and love. The laws are still there. The New Testament does not do away with the laws. We still can't murder, we can't steal, we're not supposed to do all the things over in the Old Testament. But our salvation does not depend on us being true to those. Our salvation depends on us accepting what Christ did. You and I are loved specifically, exactly, individually, by the God of love. Just as Moses' face shone, Jesus' whole body was luminous, brightly shining. We have that inside. People can't see it in our face. We won't light a dark room, but we will light a dark world. Share that love, that light. Let your light shine. The world will thank you, and God will thank you. Paul says we are a new creation when we call on Jesus Christ. Part of that new creation is we are a being now that carries the light of God. Share that light. Boldly, powerfully, on purpose, with purpose. Share that light.